So you may have heard of cloud-native compute foundation projects like Kubernetes or Prometheus, but how many others can you actually name or mention? Well, that's what we're going to be talking about today in this Cloud with Chris episode. Stay tuned as we find out more. Hello there, welcome back to another episode of Cloud with Chris. You're with me, Chris Reddington, and here we talk about all things cloud. Now, thank you for joining today. We have got a very, very exciting episode today talking all about cloud native. So you may have heard of CNCF, or the Cloud Native Compute Foundation. And you may have heard of them because of projects like Kubernetes. I think everyone has heard of Kubernetes these days, at least heard of it, if not using it or tried it out in some way. But did you know they've got many, 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 many more projects than just things like Kubernetes and Prometheus? So I'm really excited today to be joined by Annie, who's going to be talking all about Cloud Native Compute Foundation and top new projects to go and look for. So with that, let's go ahead and bring Annie onto the show. Hey Annie, how are you doing?
Hello. I'm super happy to be here and I'm doing very well. How are you?
Excellent. I'm very well, thank you, and glad to have you on the show. So first off, let's maybe start with some introductions for the folks that maybe don't know you yet.
Yeah, happy to, of course. So, hello everyone. I'm Annie, and I've been working with Kubernetes and CNCF cloud native topics for quite a long time now. I've been the CNCF and Kubernetes meetup organizer for Finland for over 3.5 years now. I do have my own cloud podcast as well called Cloud Gossip. And currently I'm working at Cast AI, which is a Kubernetes cost optimization company, as the product marketing manager.
Excellent. Awesome. Thank you for that. So I guess then you mentioned, you've been involved in the Kubernetes space for quite some time there, a few years, organizing some of the meetups, for example. And I think a lot of people know when they think about Cloud Native Compute Foundation, they think, oh, that's the place that hosts the Kubernetes project. I know that place. But they don't really think about all of the other different projects that CNCF actually look after.
Yeah, for sure. I think Kubernetes and Prometheus, as you mentioned before, are the two most well
Mm.
known. And I think Kubernetes is kind of synonymous with CNCF quite often, which is obviously, I think, good and bad at the same time, because there's so much more that CNCF has to offer as well. And I think one of the power of Kubernetes and CNCF is also all of the rest of the offering. Because using, Kubernetes out of the box, you can do that, obviously. Anyone is free to do whatever they want. But I think that the experience becomes much more enjoyable when you add some things on, you use some things that help you actually focus on the things that are most important to you, rather than, the things needed to run your important things.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the common things that I say when I'm working with customers who are on their beginning stages of working with Kubernetes. I say to them, look, everyone knows kind of the journey you're going to go on with Kubernetes. It's quite a big learning curve on its own, but actually it's not normally just limited to Kubernetes. You've got all of these other projects that you start actually bringing in to really get the benefit and get the value of building these cloud native applications. So I guess then where should we start? Because there's so many different projects that we could talk about here. What are maybe the ones that are most interesting to you, top of mind for you, for example?
Yeah, and I think even before going into the precise
Mm,
project, I think a short intro to CNCF is usually needed,
sure,
because I think it is such a like a mammoth of a thing as well.
absolutely.
So the landscape is rather large. The projects are divided into three categories. So there is graduated project, there's incubating projects, and then there's sandbox projects. So the ones that everyone knows, like Kubernetes, Prometheus, all the big ones, they are in the graduated phase, and they are very much like very very much recommended for production use, all of these things. And then obviously going from there, incubating ones are more or less in the middle tier, and then the sandbox ones are the wild newcomers. And I think then it's important to know the categories as well, because then it helps you make decisions on what you can use in production or what you should maybe. I think you can use everything in production if you want, but then you have to be aware of them, of the the life cycle of the projects, and that the new ones are obviously new ones, and they are newcomers.
Absolutely, and I'm looking at the CNCF site on my other screen here, and not to steal any of your thunder at all, but to give people an idea, at the moment, at least while we're recording, there's 15 graduated projects, 21 incubating, and 55 sandbox. And I guess when we talk about the fact that there's Kubernetes and Prometheus, which are two examples of graduated projects, there's still 13 others that people may have heard of, but then there's 76 others that are either incubating or sandbox, right? And that's so many that people probably just haven't realized are actually a part of this foundation.
Yeah, for sure. And when I've noticed that when I speak about these topics and CNCF projects around, people usually Kubernetes Prometheus, and they might know a few of the graduated projects. Some might have used them, some might have not. And then when you go to the incubating, some people have maybe heard, not heard, and then to the sandbox, and even the most, let's say, hardcore CNCF folks, they don't even have the time to dive deep into all of those projects. And that's why I usually also preface all of my sessions and talks with saying that, hey, there's so many projects, I cannot cover them all. I also cannot know which will in the end succeed. There will always be some indicators or what has good traction behind it, what's working very well. But I'm not, and no one is a fortune teller,
No.
so we cannot know what will succeed and move along. But yeah, for sure. And I think it's interesting to note that when I started speaking about these topics 3 years ago-ish, then there was only 1 or 2 graduated projects. Yes. So the scene is really ballooning, and it's really kind of becoming bigger and bigger every year. So I'm looking forward to, let's say, in 3 years when I'm speaking about these things, I'll be like, oh, there's 50 graduated projects or along those lines.
Yeah, so, absolutely. I think when I went to KubeCon, it would have been Barcelona. So what was that, 2 years ago maybe now, I guess. And yeah, I think even back then the number of graduated projects was much, much smaller. I was, again, just looking through this list and thinking how many I've either touched in some way or at least heard of, or maybe kind of played with, even POC. And I think that's maybe 10 out of the 15. So even then, for someone who's been in, as you say, in the cloud native space for a while as well, you're never going to necessarily touch all of these either. So I guess one of the important points here, maybe for us to think about as well, is it's not necessarily you have to know all of these. I think, especially with cloud in general, no one can know everything about cloud, especially in the cloud native compute foundation space as well, where there are so many projects which keep cropping up as well.
For sure, I agree completely. And I think I will give examples of 4 projects today in this nice chat, and then maybe like a bonus project as well, or a few mentions. But what I kind of really want to stress is that if there is an area that you feel like could be, that you're struggling with using Kubernetes or whatever, I think it's always worthwhile checking the project list. There's always a little description or like use case, whether it be, chaos engineering, databases or something. You can check that out and then dive deep into the project of your choice. So what I'm highlighting might not be the solution for everyone, but maybe to get you inspired into looking into the projects and finding your own match from there.
Absolutely. And not to disagree with that point, but maybe as an opposite view as well, is there are many projects in there, and sometimes as well there are some projects which almost look like they compete against each other as well. Like you've got I think KV was one of the projects, for example, and Vitesse, for example, are both types of databases almost. So again, it's needing to understand how each of those different projects might play within your solution, because they're all, like any technology, they're all going to have different use cases where they fit well. And that's part of the fun of looking through the projects, is finding out which one works well for the scenario you're looking into, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I completely agree.
Awesome.
I completely agree. Yeah.
And one final
Uh,
thing as well before we maybe jump into some of those projects. Um, I remember, I'm sure you probably had the same feeling, but when I went to KubeCon, I was kind of overwhelmed at first at how many projects there were. And again, you don't need to know all of them. I think we've stressed that. But then it got me thinking that actually this is all open source. This is all driven by the community, made by the community. So each of these different projects could be an opportunity for me to start my own open source journey as well. Like I could go and raise an issue, I could go and raise a pull request, I could actually make a change, I could be on the team that actually drive the release of an update, for example, or something like that. So maybe for listeners listening in, maybe that's something to keep in mind as well, that there's maybe lots of opportunities here when you start looking at CNCF as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's actually one of the best points, and I think one of the reasons why I particularly love CNCF as much as I love it, because I think it's such a welcoming community. Like you can get involved in so many levels, from actually contributing source, contributing different things, just starting to, if you, for example, have a project that you're using, you like, or you're interested in, just they usually have weekly office hours or similar concepts, and you can just join in. Obviously, you can just listen in for the first times, or just jump straight into giving input and whatnot. And I think the community in all of the projects and CNCF in general is such a welcoming environment. So I always enjoy recommending people to actually like truly jump in the deep end as well, if any of the things is your fancy.
Absolutely. And there's no better way to learn, I find, at least, than kind of getting hands-on, really trying something out. And what better way than trying to learn something than trying to break it at the same time? That's my motto, at least, anyway. So that's definitely how I learn, is by breaking things and then fixing them. So there we go. Maybe don't do as I do, folks. Maybe do as I... No, don't do as I say, do as I... Anyway, you get what I mean. So let's maybe take a look then at some of those projects that you were thinking about there, Annie.
Yeah, well, the first one that I usually go through depends on if it's... a lot of people know it already, so it's not particularly new, honestly, but I think it's such a good one. And I think for people who are unfamiliar with CNCF, it's a great place to start with, because it helps your whole Kubernetes journey. So what I usually like to highlight is Helm. And it's very well known, but it's also just a wonderful thing. Package management is such a great thing to use, and I think particularly with Kubernetes, it provides a lot. So I really like highlighting Helm in general, yeah.
And it's funny, funnily enough, I was chatting with a customer earlier today, when we were recording at least, about deploying stuff to their Kubernetes cluster. And they brought that question. They were like, yeah, we've heard of this Helm thing. Like, why do I want to use Helm compared with like Kubernetes manifest? And I was like, okay, right. So let's use an analogy here. And then I kind of talked to them about like, so you're using a Mac, for example. You've got things like Homebrew on the Mac. You've got things like Chocolatey on Windows. Yes, I could go and install Git, or I could go and install GitHub Desktop, for example, manually, and go get all of those things from wherever they are. That's fine, but maybe I might just want to go ahead and use a kind of a package manager to easily go and install that thing, maybe with some kind of configuration options or some parameters, pass that in. And that's kind of it. That's effectively what Helm is, but for Kubernetes. It's just a nice, easy way to wrap a layer around your Kubernetes manifest. And you kind of see, they were like, oh, right, okay, we get it now. That makes sense. And yeah, it's a great, great tool. I'm a big fan of Helm as well.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's a bit of a no-brainer sometimes, but as you have kind of had a discussion as well, it's not a no-brainer for people who are not, familiar with it. Yeah. So I think it's worth always mentioning, and obviously it also provides a lot of benefits in other areas as well. And I think when I do my Helm demo, usually it's so easy to demo it that it feels kind of even silly to demo it, because it's just like click, 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 and then you're done. But that's the magic of it. So it's really nice.
But I think, to be fair though, something that, to that point about the demoing Helm, it wasn't always that easy. If we think back to like Helm 2, for example, where you still had to use Tiller, for example, and have the server client kind of set up and all these things, it was a lot harder previously. I think that was before it graduated as a project, if I remember rightly. But
Yeah.
it's certainly come a long way. It's a great project.
Yeah, that was in the previous version of Helm, and it was a bit more harder, and some of the commands have gotten easier this time as well. And I think Helm particularly is such a wonderful project because it is so mature.
Yep.
So there's, it has passed 1 million downloads already a month in 2019, which means that it's just kind of very reliable, very kind of focused on security. It has multiple maintainers, multiple companies backing it. So it's definitely not going anywhere anytime soon.
Absolutely.
So I think that's kind of really good to highlight as well.
Absolutely. Good. Excellent.
Yeah. And I think also kind of worth mentioning about Helm is obviously the fact that you can manage the complexity, and it also helps with updates as well. And the rollback features and the sharing features are also really lovely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, people might be listening to that and thinking, okay, rollbacks, I get that with Kubernetes. Why do I want to go and use something like Helm, for example, and some of those other pieces I get with Kubernetes in general? Why go Helm? And I think really it's one of those things that you want to start. This is what I say to most organizations who are kind of looking at technologies, is actually go and try it out, get hands-on, prove out a concept, just try and understand it first before you say, no, we're not going to go and use that, because actually you start seeing the value in terms of your operations, your DevOps pipelines, when you can just go and do Helm install done kind of thing, and that's your application installed because you got your configuration all there in your manifest files already. It makes it super easy to start deploying some of those workloads.
Yeah, for sure. I agree completely. Wise words for sure. And I think worth highlighting for Helm as a kind of change as well. So Helm used to have a Helm Hub where you can find charts and whatnot. But so this is usually the bonus project that I talk about. So Artifact Hub, it's a cool CNCF Sandbox project that's nowadays, because as mentioned kind of before, the CNCF landscape is rather large and complicated.
Absolutely.
So they decided to, or are kind of, it's figured that it's better that there's actually one place where everyone can use to find different artifacts, rather than every single project having their own hub. So Artifact Hub is nowadays what provides that for Helm as well, instead of Helm Hub nowadays.
Awesome.
So that's really nice.
Awesome. This is one I haven't heard of yet, so this is why I'm smiling right now from ear to ear, because I'm learning something. I love learning. So Artifact Hub is a brand new project to effectively centralize then all of the artifacts that these number of different projects that are in CNCF to make it easier for people to go to one place. Awesome. Love that idea.
Yeah.
Excellent.
It is. I think it's lovely, and I think it's super great because, as you kind of mentioned, it's a sandbox project, and that's why most people haven't heard about it, even people who are using Helm, for example, on a daily basis. So it's always good to discover new things.
Yeah. And I think to pick up on something as well, maybe let's just make it a bit more explicit for people here that the different stages of the CNCF projects. You've got Sandbox, you've got Incubation, and you've got Graduation or Graduated projects. And I think something that we mentioned a bit earlier was this idea that the graduated projects have so many companies backing it, for example. They have so many maintainers, they've had so many downloads. And I think to really make sure that people understand, because the thing that I often see from organizations who are looking to go into the cloud native space is they kind of think, oh, hold on, some of this is open source. We need to be a little bit careful about what we start depending on, because what happens if that disappears and goes away? And I think that's where you've got this concept of these different project stages, isn't it? That there's almost a low barrier for getting a project to a sandbox stage, but then as you get more towards that graduated stage, there's a higher barrier and a lot of rigor actually to get that project into the graduated state. And it's quite an involved process, I think, from what I remember.
It is. It very much is. It takes quite a lot of time, and it is like a rigorous, a process.
Yeah.
For sure. It's kind of to validate the projects, and I think that's how it all started exactly, because you need to kind of have a way to separate the projects, because they are in different stages of maturity, and even though everything can be used in production to your heart content in the way, but it is recommended to use the later stage projects more, because they are more stable. They are, they have multiple companies backing the multiple maintainers. And I think a great way to highlight this is also this image, which is, that the Sandbox projects are, so, for the innovators, for the techies, and the incubating ones are for the early adopters and whatnot, and the graduated projects are fit for everyone, anyone and everyone could use them and whatnot. So I think that's highly beneficial to understand, because then everyone is on the level playing field, so no one is kind of surprised if something happens. And I think a fun tidbit is when they added the Sandbox category, the kind of the movement in there really kind of blossomed. So when they didn't have such a kind of easy entry to the kind of the ecosystem, then it was a lot harder to get started. It was a lot harder to get traction to become incubating or graduated projects. So really adding that kind of starting layer helps with helping to kickstart all of the open source projects.
Absolutely. And just if I just show my screen for a moment and bring that up on the screen here, you'll notice, for anyone who's watching the video, that what I've got on screen is actually a GitHub repository from the CNCF, which shows the process that you have to go through all of the different stages. So even that kind of process to get from Sandbox to incubating to graduation is open sourced as well, and is clearly available for anyone to go and read. So if you've got any concerns, it is all clearly available. All I did was went onto the CNCF website and just clicked on a few links and arrived at that. So you too can go and learn all about the process if you really want to go and understand, which, as you can see, has a lot of details.
It is a lot, and I think this is one of the best parts. Like, I think there's so much information on CNCF, so it's really hard to remember everything. But the best part is that you can always just find out more, and whatever info you need at that point, just find it out, and more every time you search it. And I think a good example of that is, I think I want to always highlight as well, the CNCF survey, which is a yearly survey to see what's everyone kind of using and what's happening in the cloud native space. Every time I open that survey, I learn something new. And like, I've opened it gazillion times, but there's a new statistics, a new part of it that catches my attention. So it's always absolute joy to check it out.
And I think that's the beauty, and also some might see it as a negative side, but I see it as the beauty anyway, of something like CNCF, where there are so many projects that keep moving so quickly. There is always something to learn, and you can definitely keep learning if that's something you're interested in.
For sure, yeah.
Awesome. So cool. We were just talking about, I think, Artifact Hub before I kind of sidetracked us. So where do we go next, Annie?
No worries. So I think next we could talk a bit about Linkerd.
Yes.
Yes, it's an incubating project, but I think it's just about to go to graduated or just moved. I think it was highlighted in KubeCon most recently. I have a horrible detailed memory, so it's always, and it actually takes a while for, as you could see from the list of things that you need to do. So it takes a while. So usually projects kind of say that they are moving, and then it takes a while, and then they will actually move categories. So it's a thing. But yeah, so I think Linkerd is a really great service mesh, and then the ones who are seeing the slides in the video will see that the tagline is the different kind of service mesh, I think, which is kind of lovely, because essentially what it is, it's super light, super fast, and it's just a service mesh for Kubernetes, and it's the first service mesh actually. And it's one of my favorite parts about it is that it's super community minded. And it is very much, kind of built around the goal to reduce mental overhead of even having a service mesh. And really what that is then, provides, it provides observability, reliability, and security.
Yeah. And again, I know we've talked about the community and how great it is, but I remember when I was at KubeCon, I think I was watching a talk from William Morgan, who is one of the folks who actually, I believe anyway, one of the folks who created Linkerd originally.
Yeah.
And the fact that you can go and speak to these people who created these awesome projects that so many people use, I think this is where the fanboy in me comes out a little bit, because it is just so cool having such a great community that you can be a part of there. But Linkerd is definitely the service mesh I typically try and use when in my own personal projects, because I'm a big fan of Linkerd. Yeah, it's a great service mesh. So great to see it's on the path to graduation there.
Yeah, perfect. That's really great to hear that there is service mesh and Linkerd fans for sure. Yeah. But I think also just to mention a few of the other kind of parts, features of Linkerd. So it's as mentioned, very much thriving open source community. I think it's very welcoming indeed. It's really simple to use, so there's really no complex APIs. It just kind of works. It has deep runtime diagnostics, so you can get a comprehensive suite of diagnostic tools. And as mentioned, it is ultra light and ultra fast. So it's built in Rust, and its data plane proxies are incredibly small and very fast. And it really is installs very easily, and it's has really great actionable service metrics as well, where you can monitor such things as success rate, request volume, and latency.
Absolutely.
For example.
And I think this is one of the interesting discussions that can sometimes come up with service mesh is, how do I decide which service mesh I should go for? Because of course there's many other service meshes out there, but then you need to start weighing up, what features do they all have? How do they perform? Even things like we've talked about with the cloud native side of things, like who's actually backing those as projects, because you want to make sure, of course, that you're going ahead and not taking a dependency on one specific project, for example. So yeah, it can be an interesting space, the service mesh space. I think we'll skirt around that topic, but I know it's definitely one I see come up in Twitter and in forums and discussions that people normally ask, which service mesh should I go and use? But interestingly, was it last year or the year before, I think Microsoft announced the service mesh interface, SMI, as well, to kind of make that decision a little bit easier. So there's almost a pluggable interface, if you like, so that you can go and it doesn't matter which service mesh you use, because there's this consistent interface you can kind of plug into. So I believe that's even a project somewhere in CNCF as well, if I'm not mistaken. I might be wrong. I think it is. But again, there's many projects.
Yeah, I believe you. I don't remember all the projects by heart, either how. So let's just say I believe you completely, and for the sake of this discussion, it is. But yeah, there's so many projects for sure, and I think I can also mention that CNCF also provides tools for choosing different projects. So they have such things as the CNCF trail map that helps you kind of select few the tools that you are needed and whatnot. So there's a lot of kind of material to help you pick and choose as well if you are running into questions like which one of these services should you use and whatnot.
Absolutely. And just to go back on that point, it is a Sandbox project, so still in the early days right now, service mesh interface. So there we go, but it is in there.
Perfect. Well remembered.
Excellent. Yeah, that's the thing. Information goes in, it's in there somewhere. Can't quite remember exactly where or how, but it's there. Awesome.
Yeah, for sure.
Excellent. So Linkerd, cool. We've covered that one.
Yeah, then I think we can skip to talk about Kudo, which is actually one of my favorite ones, because I particularly like highlighting it because I've seen so many people excited about Kudo, which is the Kubernetes Universal Declarative Operator, because people have been so excited about it in the meetups that I've organized. So even though it's a sandbox project, I've heard so many people talking about it, which I think it's a great indication that people are excited. So I think it's a really nice one. So what does Kudo then do, which is then a bit less familiar to people usually? So it's really about, the stateless versus stateful apps. So if everything was stateless, everything would be super simple. And Kubernetes has been focused on stateless apps, and the stateful apps do not really like it. And the solution for that has been operators. But really, building operators requires so much deep expertise and may require thousands of lines of code, which essentially means that, there's substantial engineering resource needed. So each operator is unique and purpose-built for each application. So it takes a lot of time to build them.
Sure.
But here's where Kudo comes in. So it is, as it says there, Kubernetes Universal Declarative Operator. So rather than using a custom operator, Kudo provides a universal operator with concept of plans built in. So with Kudo, you can create operators without needing a deep knowledge of the Kubernetes or coding, just by defining the lifestyle stages. And you can use it just by using Kubernetes APIs. So it's a lot easier to learn than building your things from the ground up. And it has Kubernetes native management. So you can use kubectl and other familiar tools as well.
Awesome. Yeah, Kudo is one of the ones I've never heard of at all. So, and agree. I think the stateful application kind of idea in Kubernetes, this is one phrase I remember so clearly when I went to KubeCon. I think it was the folks over at Google. They said something like, so you've got stateless apps and you've got stateful apps, and you can easily deploy stateless apps to Kubernetes, and you can do great. And you can deploy you can easily deploy stateless apps to Kubernetes. You can deploy stateful apps to Kubernetes. It's not impossible. It's just very, 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 very hard. And I'm like, yep, agree. So it's great to see there's a project focusing on that problem.
Yeah, and Kudo is a Sandbox project. Okay. So all of the kind of disclaimers that said in this session already apply, but it is really nice, and there's so much excitement around it. So I hope that they will also, move forward in their journey through the ecosystem.
Awesome. And I think the important call to action for anyone listening in who's listening to Kudo thinking that sounds like an awesome project, I really want to go and use that. Remember the type of checks that the community go through there. They need to see the downloads of people actually going and using that in production. They need to go and see, for example, the backing, the maintainers, the support. So again, it's all community driven. So if you like that project, you know what to do.
Yeah, definitely. A good reminder always. Open source projects really need all the help that they can get if there's people interested and using them, because without the help, no one knows what will happen in the future, obviously. Absolutely. So it's always super important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, I'm going to be playing with Kudo. I think I've never heard of it before, so I need to go and learn now.
For sure. Always good to hear about new projects. And that's the kind of point of my highlights as well. There's kind of a few ones that are more well known. And then there's a few ones that are kind of wild cards that people can, start learning as well.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Good. So we talked Helm, Linkerd, Kudo. I think there was one more.
Yes, there is one more that I will be highlighting today. Yeah. And that is KEDA, so Kubernetes Event-Driven Autoscaling. I think it's very funny that the naming convention is very similar with both the two last ones. But as far as I know, that's just complete accident, and I haven't selected these projects with that in mind at all. So.
Awesome.
But yeah, it's the tagline there is application autoscaling made simple. And KEDA is a sandbox project that's actually not now just moving to incubating or just moved. It's as I said, kind of the time when everyone's swifting around the categories. But But yeah, so then what is KEDA? So it really offers to serverless, which is then kind of built around the fact that you can focus on your code, you can use event-driven code and scaling, and on-demand compute and pay-per-use and all of these kind of things. So default Kubernetes scaling is really not well suited for event-driven applications, and Kubernetes is more for resource-based scaling, so CPU and memory and whatnot. But event-driven scale controlling, then KEDA is event-driven scale controlling that then can run inside any Kubernetes cluster, and you can install it into new or existing clusters. And it really gives you extensible and pluggable scalers to grab metrics from multiple sources. And it's just super easy. So it can monitor the rate of the events to preemptively act before the CPU is affected, which is where the power lies.
Absolutely. I think for anyone who's listening in, maybe isn't so familiar with some of the Kubernetes projects, for example, and the cloud native projects like KEDA, you may have heard obviously of Azure Functions in the past and heard about the kind of event-driven models there, and think about the ideas that you can bind to something like a service bus queue or a storage account or some kind of external metric that you want to go and scale based upon, because if you're doing it based on CPU or memory, to Annie's point, you don't really know if you need to scale properly or not. That's not really a good indicator of how many instances you need to go and take on that work. And KEDA's really trying to solve the same problem there, but in the Kubernetes space instead. So rather than being Azure Functions, which is very specific to Azure, making it a broad Kubernetes kind of concept and a broad Kubernetes model, and being able to scale based upon various other queues or whatever it may be. And this is a project I'm super excited about. I think it's a big what's the word I'm looking for? It's just an important area for Kubernetes, I think. And you look at the world and how technology is kind of moving with event-driven architectures and similar. I think to bring that concept onto Kubernetes, I know there's been other projects in the past that have kind of tried to do that, but there's been some challenges in the way they've gone and implemented things. I think some of them can't scale to zero, which is, of course, another problem as well with this space. So yeah, KEDA is an awesome project, which I'm super excited about.
Yeah, for sure. Happy to hear that. But yeah, so KEDA is essentially, as you mentioned, super cool, and it's really nice. I think also in the sense that it's not rebuilding anything that Kubernetes offers out of the box. It's single purpose, simple, and super non-intrusive. And it works with any container and any workload. And I think I'm super happy always talking about KEDA in addition to it being a really great project, is that that the company that I work for, Cast AI, is a KEDA user as well.
Nice.
So yeah, so we, for example, offer cost optimization, which is then obviously it's part of it's event-driven scaling and whatnot, where we use KEDA in the background also in addition to a few other things to really kind of cut Kubernetes bills in half. So I think that's also one of the reasons why I'm excited, because I think KEDA can also be used to build such cool things as well.
Yeah,
so, yeah.
And to that point, right, about cost management and cost savings, if again, just for anyone who's maybe not as deep in the Kubernetes space, think about the idea that you've got different levels of scaling almost here. So you've got on your Kubernetes cluster, you have nodes that host your containers. And those containers are commonly called pods in Kubernetes. It can be many containers held inside, but basic building block is a pod. And imagine that you have this thing called KEDA, which is like a scale engine. It can scale how many of those pods you need based upon like messages on a queue or some kind of external event or trigger, for example. But imagine then that you're using a cloud provider like AWS, GCP, Azure, for example, that can then go ahead and scale the nodes as well based upon whether then more pods need scheduling on the cluster. So what that means is you don't need to have, like in the old world on premises, you have to have all of the compute for your maximum kind of throughput level, and then you're wasting a load of cost because obviously that's machines that are running all the time. you can scale up and down as your workload needs. So this is why I'm really excited about KEDA as well. I think it's an awesome project which has a lot of potential, especially with the event-driven world that we seem to be going more and more towards, I think, in technology.
For sure, honestly, I feel the same way. I think I should like start marking down every time I hear event driven
Absolutely.
in any podcast or tech session, because it is mentioned so much nowadays. So it's definitely a very hot topic in the future for sure.
Absolutely. Excellent. Cool.
Yeah.
So we talked. Hold on. my memory now is being tested here. Oh, there we go. We got a slide to help it. There we go. So Helm, Linkerd, Kudo, KEDA. Oh, and the bonus artifact hub as well. There we go. We did say we were getting the bonus. Awesome.
Yeah, and there was also a bonus project from your side as well. So that was really nice to hear.
Yes, that is true. Yeah, I brought in Service Mesh Interface, exactly. And this is the fun thing, right? Is these are just a handful of the, hold on, I'm going to do some maths again. So we've got, where are we? 15 graduated, 21 incubating projects, 55 sandbox projects, so what, 60, 70, 91 different projects. And we've just covered about 5 or 6. Let's include Kubernetes and Prometheus, so about 7. Not even 10% of all the projects that are there. So it's just awesome to see how much innovation, how much new work is going on to really help the community there. I think it's an awesome space.
It is definitely, and I like that. I like to highlight that it's not it's just a tiny fraction of what's available, because there really is so much, and I hope this kind of reminder serves to everyone that, you know, okay, these were cool projects, these were very interesting, and maybe it sparks an idea in your head that, hey, I should maybe get to know the other ones. Maybe there's something else that can serve me as well and whatnot. So I think it's always good to highlight that as well.
Absolutely. So I guess we've been going for kind of 40 minutes or so here, so starting to think of wrapping us up. I guess if you were starting all of this journey again into the cloud native space, the CNCF, and you had to kind of go back and tell your past self, you know, this is what you should do. These are the kind of top tips from Annie to past Annie or future Annie. I don't know. I haven't got time travel covered yet. What would they be?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think maybe my answer is kind of a lame one, since I speak a lot about sandbox projects, but I think it would be to get to know sandbox projects, because that's exactly what I'm kind of constantly thinking about. Because if you can get involved and get to know the projects when they're very like early on, when, you know, they might not be recommended for you know, full scale production and whatnot, but if you get to know them, then you can see their stories like folding, and you can see them getting bigger, and you can kind of join into the celebrations within the projects as well. So I think that gives a really great addition to the kind of any work that you do, because I think particularly with open source projects, I think it's such a wonderful thing to see that the community is to really blossom.
Absolutely.
So that's definitely something, like if I could go back down like in time to really work on like early on Kubernetes as well, like super early on, I think that would be amazing as well. So like get involved early, I guess, would be my advice.
So there we go, folks. You all just need to go and spot the next Kubernetes and start working on that. That's what I heard there.
Yeah, for sure.
Excellent. Well, Annie, thank you so much. That's been a really great session. I think it's really shone a light on CNCF, that it's more than just Kubernetes, it's more than just Prometheus. There's, 97 projects I think we just mentioned while we're recording right now. You know, who knows, tomorrow or next week there may be more, and there's great opportunities for people to get involved there. So thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
So there we go, folks. We have been talking all about Cloud Native Compute Foundation. We've been talking about Kubernetes, Prometheus, Linkerd, KEDA, Kudo. I have a terrible memory, but you hit it all there, folks, over the last 40 or so minutes. So you know what to do. First off, if you want to get involved in the community, these open source projects absolutely are always looking for people to get involved and looking for people to kind of support, whether that is raising issues and testing things out, whether that is actually writing code and doing pull requests, or even being part of the project team and just helping coordinate things. Community is what drives this, so please absolutely get involved if you've been inspired by the talk today. And likewise, these podcasts, these recordings, this content doesn't kind of spring up on its own, so please do go ahead and support the channel. Please like the episode, please hit subscribe, and please hit the notification bell so you know as soon as there is new content. And of course, not just on YouTube, also on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and cloudwithchris.com as well. And of course, not just Cloud with Chris. Annie mentioned there her own podcast, which you should absolutely go and check out, and many other great content creators out there as well. So with that, folks, thank you so much for listening in and watching today. Stay safe, stay healthy, and until the next one, bye for now.